I mentioned earlier about how people actually view icons in the early church. Like people have a deceptive understanding that early church, even though they drew icons, they don't venerate them. Like I want to say, you that's you're really a modern Western people. No ancient people drew uh, religious images for decorative purpose. That kind of idea simply did not exist in the ancient time.
Yeah,
Religious images were never used as simply decorative. Like that is a modern thing, starting from Protestantism, starting from 17th, 18th century. Like
yeah,
that's not something that you see
yeah.
that's not even
People
something you
hang
see in
up
the Middle
pictures
Ages.
to admire them.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's not the ancient, that's not the Greco-Roman concept in the secular context, and
exactly.
it wasn't the context in Christianity either, for sure.
Right.
Um, and I mean, and we have second century icons. We have second
Yeah.
century icons in Asia Minor and in Syria, and so
Yeah.
that attests to the fact that they were widespread early on, and that we can assume from that that they go back
Yeah.
to the first century.
And they
Of
use
course, the
this.
issue is
Yeah.
broader than that as well. The issue is that people who say that lack the tradition outside the Bible, which is that
Right. Right. Right.
Luke made icons, and
Right.
so people lack a tradition outside the Bible. That's part of the issue in that as well, isn't it?
Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
I think it's a combination. It's a comment we lack the tradition. They lack their understanding of
Yeah. Yeah.
of why they did things the way they did. It's a combination
Yeah.
of that kind of thing. And then people just don't know the evidence. Like most people probably don't know that in Ephesus, in a grotto, you have icons from the
Second
second,
century
third, or
icons.
fourth
Yeah.
century somewhere.
And
And
I'm
then you have, yeah,
I'm actually very surprised to see the second century icons in Ephesus because well that's a first of all that's an icon of the this the story of the acts of Paul and Thecla. So that's very
yeah,
early. And
yeah.
and the way they depicts it, like the way it depict the story with singled out character, but also putting the character in the context of the story. That's exactly how Orthodox uh, icons are still used today. And also like
It's
also
this the grotto
yes
of Saint
that's
Paul in
yeah.
Ephesus. This is the one
And
we're talking about.
and also, like these icons use exactly the same symbolism as now what we see in the Orthodox Church today. It just goes to show that,
They
it,
say here it ranges from fourth century to 12th or 13th century,
mm,
but I heard something different from
yeah,
somebody
yeah.
else. But
Dr. Wallace told you that it's second century, right?
he told well, yeah, he told me he didn't tell me this day. He told me something earlier than that.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So yeah,
And I think this is one reason why he doesn't have a problem with iconography
uh, yes,
because they're so
yeah. I
early. I
guess
mean,
yeah. It's so
and
early.
of course, as
Yeah,
somebody who studies manuscripts, I'm sure he sees them all throughout manuscripts.
right, right. Yeah, yeah,
Okay, look at
yeah.
this. The Merle, okay, the Merle is actually a portrayal of the episode found in the apocryphal book, the Acts of Paul and Thecla, dated to the mid second century. Okay, so but he's talking about the Acts, though,
That's yeah, yeah, yeah.
not the icon.
Mm.
Um, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you have stuff that is from that tradition this early as well.
Right, right, right. Yeah. Again, you see exactly how the way it's depicted exactly is how you see it in in the Orthodox Church today, like in iconography today. So it's you see the consistency there. I I just find it people just don't understand how ancient people think. Like this is an extreme example, but if you go to China in some rural areas, if some people if some people convert to um, iconoclastic Protestantism, they will throw away the pictures of their parents, of their
Mm,
dead parents, because they understood parents of the pictures of deceased persons are religious images, like they have some spiritual powers in it. No images in the ancient culture in a non-modern, pre-modern culture, or if people want to say primitive culture, no images are merely decorative. Everything has a symbolism. Everything has a spiritual connection behind it. So
Mm,
like, you
yeah.
just people just don't like people just don't
I
see it.
recommend uh, I recommend John of Damascus on divine images.
Yeah,
He
yeah,
pretty
yeah.
much settles the whole debate. I mean, he explains
Yeah.
it from every angle. He explains it from this angle too, actually.
Mm,
He
mm,
does a really good job of settling this issue. I think that he makes it very clear that there is no contradiction
yeah,
between iconography, venerating icons, and in terms of the church's tradition and like what
yeah,
Scripture says, and he
yeah,
gives the reasons why we do it and how to understand it philosophically. Even I mean, it's
yeah,
pretty
yeah,
clear. He draws
yeah,
off of Dionysius,
yeah.
um, Dionysius the Areopagite, who is not pseudepigraphal, but
Mm,
actually did write works. He's the guy who knew Paul from Acts
mm,
17, and we have his works actually.
right.
And St. John of Damascus references him as if
Mm,
he is a legitimate writer, because of course he didn't think he was pseudepigraphal.
mm,
And so John of Damascus also helps in his philosophical discussion of divine images, and so to understand that as well. So
mm,
yeah,
yeah.
I think John of Damascus's divine images is the most is the it pretty much settles the issue. I mean, you don't really have to
Mm,
go much further than that. It pretty much settles the issue of iconography and why we do it and
yeah.
everything. It's simply a lost. It's like with so many other things we talk about on this channel. It's simply a lost thing. It's
Mm,
simply a lost thing. It's just something that people just don't do anymore. And so
yeah.
because of that, they have built up all these false ideas. So whenever they see it, they think it's something that's not, and they have this feeling from our modern culture and
Yeah,
sentiment
yeah.
that it's just not. It's just we're just different. We live in a different
That's
time, different
right. Yeah,
culture,
yeah,
different place, different sentiment, different feelings,
yeah.
different ways of thinking.
People
And
should people should really have this realization that after the Reformation, after Renaissance, after Reformation, after the Enlightenment movement, the entire Western culture is very, very unique in when you look at the entire human history, like
yeah,
it's the modern Western culture is very
yeah,
unique
we need
in
to abandon it.
every aspect of like life, social life, personal life, everything. Like the way people think it's norm today in the modern Western world or influenced by modern Western culture is is entirely strange and abnormal to the ancient
Yeah,
people for a for 10,000 years, which is from the beginning of the creation. So it's
some people just don't want to be ancient though. They want to be modern. So
and then they misunderstand a bunch of things. Like they trying to
yeah,
impose
yeah.
their own ideas on the ancients. Like they criticize in the wrong way. They don't even know
Yeah.
what the ancient people are talking about.
I like what back to the icon thing. I like what Saint John of Damascus says. He has this one quote in his book where he says, what books do for those who know letters,
Mm.
icons do for those who are illiterate." So
Yes.
it's like so they're both appealing to the sense of the eye. You know,
Mm.
it's like in a sense you could think of a writing as kind of like an icon. They're kind of similar because they're both written. It's
Right.
just and they both communicate information. It's just the writing communicates information in a different way than a picture does, but they both
Mm.
appear to the senses. They both appeal to the senses of your eyes.
Yeah.
And so, what a book does for those who for those who can read, an icon does for those who can't. And so he explains it in terms of its purpose and function. And I think that's very helpful. Now, the
Yeah.
icon again, though, is something a bit more than that, and we venerate them. But I
Mm.
suppose we venerate the Bible too, don't we, in
Yeah,
church? Right?
yeah.
I
We
mean, they
kiss the
bring the Bible
Bible.
up.
We yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So he does a good job of explaining the different kinds of veneration. You know, there's veneration for worship, there's veneration for honor, there's veneration for people who are standing like in place who are working God's purpose that we venerate for that reason, like
Mm.
Joseph and so forth. He gives Joseph as an example.
Mm.
You know, and then so there's different kinds of veneration. There's different functions of what an icon is for, and it's actually there's a lot of different angles that you can think about and consider whenever
Mm,
looking at this issue, and a lot that you
yeah,
probably wouldn't realize until you pick up his book. So yeah, I think
yeah,
his book is really good for that. It's really good
yeah.
for kind of opening you up to different ways of considering what it's about and why you do it. I think that's a really important point, though, is that that he says that he hints at, and that it communicates information. It's telling
Mm,
you something. It's not just
yeah.
there. It's not just there for you to make and enjoy. You know, like that is the modern sentiment. You know, like we hang up pictures so we can look at it and enjoy it or admire it,
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
for decoration. But it's not just for that. It's telling you something.
Mm,
It's there so that you can point to it and tell your son, hey, you know, this is what the Lord did.
mm,
And so
yeah.
just how in ancient Israel, whenever they had the Ark of the Covenant and they had the temple and the tabernacle, and
Mm,
they could point to that, and their son would say, "Hey, what's this for? Why is this here?" They'd say, "Oh yeah, this is all here because of what God did for us
mm.
during the time of the Exodus."
Yeah, yeah.
Now we can point to our icons of the scenes
Mm,
depicting things from the Gospels and say, "Oh yeah, and by the way, the Lord also did this. You know, He came in the
mm,
person of Jesus Christ, and He did all this." And so I think that he really does a good job of laying it out like that, to explain
mm.
its purpose and its function. I mean, shoot, we even have illustrated Bibles for kids these days. I mean, so if you have an
Yeah.
illustrated Bible for a kid, it's like, you know, an icon is, why would you think an icon is worse than that? An icon is
Yeah.
in historical Christianity. Like that's the real picture that you should be looking at, as
Yeah.
opposed to one made up by somebody who is outside of the historical Christian tradition,
Exactly.
an illustrated kids Bible. But it's a very similar idea. We have movies, you know, we have movies
Yeah.
that depict Christ. You know, that's a moving picture. You know, it's like, gosh, if you think a still picture is bad, man, you better throw away your moving pictures of the
Some
movies and
people
stuff.
do actually.
Some people do. Well, you're
Yeah.
pretty radical.
Yeah.
Um, but he just does a good job of explaining Exodus and explaining you know, God commanded Moses to make certain things that were images, and he
Mm,
explains the reason. The reason is because no one had seen God at that point.
mm,
He explains it philosophically too, like in terms of matter, in terms of
mm.
what is created and what is uncreated, in
Yeah,
terms
yeah,
of
yeah.
Christ coming down and becoming incarnate.
Mm,
He explains it in a lot of really helpful ways. So,
mm.
yeah, anyways, I think that his book pretty much settles the whole debate, though, because it's really well written and he
Yeah, yeah.
covers
Well,
everything.
yeah.
So,
It is his book that eventually settles the iconoclastic movement. So
yeah,
the
yeah,
entire debate was settled by his work. So yeah.
yeah, good.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, so he literally does settle it then.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So,
Yeah, yeah. It's just people
yeah,
don't read
it's
it.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, we are. Yeah, yeah. It's unfortunately we're not born knowing all this stuff. We have to like relearn. It's like every generation has to relearn it, or else they'll
Yeah.
forget it,
Yeah.
or it'll be lost to them. So
It should be
yeah,
those books should be our textbooks, honestly. Like growing up, these books should be our textbooks. Like we should
yeah.
read those as we grow up, like we learn in the school. That's how Christian education should be.